Now we're going to take a look at the new ecosystem functions and new tools for ecosystems within the material editor. So first thing I'm going to do is load up a standard terrain, and I'm going to position our camera a little ways away from it so we can see it in full view. Just going to kind of zoom out here. And now let's go into the material editor. I'm going to go ahead and click ecosystem, and we're just going to keep the underlying material that sort of default color, that beige we have there. And you'll notice that we have two layers. We have our ecosystem layer and our underlying material layer. But what we can also do now in View 6, which is just fantastic, is have multiple layers for different types of ecosystems. So we can create multiple ecosystems each on each layer. So I can add another layer, and I'm just going to add default and click ecosystem. And now we have two ecosystem layers, and these react in different ways. We have new distribution functions down here. We have affinity with layer and repulsion from layer. So in other words, we have the ability to populate closer to the other previous ecosystems on other layers. So since we have, I'll just go ahead and load some plants in here. I'll load in the summer cherry tree, and I'm going to go on the above layer and add another plant, which I'm going to select the reeds. And now what I can do with the reeds is affinity from layer, so I can either move them closer to the objects on the previous layer, so the trees will be surrounded by this, by the reeds, so I can increase that, or I can make them farther away, and then I can also repulse them with repulsion from layer for an entirely different type of effect, which is a little more sensitive than the affinity with layer. And we can go a little more overboard with the effects than we could with affinity with layer. And those are dependent on how the layers are positioned, but we see that it is not active on our bottom layer, but it is on our top. And the more we add on top of this one, you will see that all of these options are available for that. We also have a new environment tab, which is available, which also affects layers to other layers. And it's the same as in the simple material editor with the environment tab. So we can go through all of these different options, ranged by altitude if we want, by object, absolute, by material, and then we can adjust the altitude constraint, the slope constraint, and the orientation constraint. So we have all of these new different options to blend these different layers together as well. Each of them, of course, producing different types of effects. The easiest way to see is, of course, to actually go through and play around with it. So now we're going to go back to the General tab, and we're going to take a look at these different plants. And I'm just going to go ahead and actually bring our summer cherry tree down to a very low density, to about 14%. We're going to have our reeds that we have here, and an increased percentage, about 75%, and I'm going to go ahead and actually add another layer, which I'm set with defaults, turn it into an ecosystem, and now I'm going to add another plant to this, and we'll just add some Drybrush. And we want to have the density of this at 100%. So now we have different layers with different densities, and when I go ahead and populate, we're going to see that actually take effect. And we want to make sure that we're populating for each one of the layers, because they all need to be populated separately. But now we can see the range of differences. We have where we have our summer cherry tree with the density of 14%. We only have a few actual cherry trees, and let's take a look at the top view, give us a little bit better idea of how it's looking. And then we can see just the different density of all the different objects. And of course, we could blend them together and populate those either closer to other objects or farther away from other objects. As you can see, they're farther away now with that specific one. And keep in mind with the density too, if you have a density of 100%, they're pretty much going to show up everywhere anyway. So sometimes these do not really matter depending on which type of ecosystem you're working on and what your density is at. We also have another really cool tool, which is the display options. And it's pretty much similar as it was covered in the paint ecosystem section, where we could actually paint the ecosystems and then look at the quality. But now we can actually do it within the material editor as well, and for each specific layer, which is very, very cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at, I want all our cherry trees to be smooth shaded, so that way, let's just take a look. I'm going to close this out really quick and reposition our camera. But now we can see all of our cherry trees are all highest quality and at full resolution, and they're not the billboards, which are these instances that are everywhere for the other objects. So we can make sure that we see all the cherry trees, and let's go ahead and make those a little bit bigger too while we're at it. We'll grab our terrain, and we're going to go to our scale on our summer cherry tree, and I'm going to increase that a little bit higher to about 2, and click populate again. Click OK, and now we have some much larger trees, and actually just one tree. We can see it's very, very large, but we can see it at full quality no matter what. And now let's adjust some of the other layers. Let's say we want to see the reeds at full quality, but just near the camera. So let's grab our reeds and select full quality near camera. And the ones that are not full quality near the camera, I want to select 2. We can do flat shaded. So that way there's still objects in the scene. And let's just move it a little bit closer so we can still see them. And let's go back, and now let's do the dry brush, which is our top one. And we'll go ahead and change that to actually just smooth shade it all around, so that way we can see all of those objects entirely, if the system can handle it, and if they show up. It might take just a sec to refresh with that many plants on there. So now we can see all of our different dry brush plants, and our reeds are being displayed mostly at the highest quality everywhere. But it's a great new tool, so we can also set this to near with camera. So the closer it is to the camera, then it's full quality, and the rest will all be billboards. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Let's grab our reeds, and we're going to make these billboards, full quality near camera, and billboard full quality near camera for the dry brush, and click OK. And you can see we have some, and with this option on, we can actually see on the top, along with 2 cherry trees now, here's where we can actually see a little bit better. We have full quality near the camera. We can see the actual radius right there for all the different trees. So then we can adjust the radius for all the different ones. We could do the summer cherry tree. Let's say we want to see all of them in a certain radius, so we could raise that. Or we want to see all of the other ones maybe a little bit less. And we could just go ahead and actually adjust these different layers. It's pretty neat, adjusting the full quality. And then depending on what your system can handle, you can make adjustments accordingly. And then there's just one last thing I wanted to show you about the ecosystems. And if we go back into the material editor, you'll see that we have a paint button. That's right next to clear and populate, and this works for every single different layer. So which means we can actually paint on specific layers, which would be a recommended method if you're going to be entirely on one surface. Is to definitely paint with layers, because you'll have much more power with it. And the more we update our general tab, it'll also update that painting on each one of the layers. And then we can go and select the display options for each of those painted effects within there, because if you notice when we click on paint, it's unlike the other painting panel, which actually has our quality displayed right here. So it's a little bit different. It's built into this surface editor, but it's very, very powerful when working with layers, and of course by itself it's extremely powerful.